Hey everyone, Little Snow 9 here, and a few weeks ago I made a video going into detail as to why I love my top 5 favourite movies. It was kind of an experiment to see if this style of content would be a good suit for my channel, and since the video got pretty positive reception from my friends and some viewers, I figured I should continue making videos like this. This time around I figured I should make another top 5 video, except this time I will be discussing my top 5 favourite 2025 specific movies, which is just me discussing why I enjoyed my top 5 favourite movies that were released in 2025. Just like last time, I don't have a microphone or a recording set, just a phone that I am currently talking into. Sorry if this video is low quality, but there's not really much I can do about that. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. Number 5. Superman.
This is just a movie we all needed. The last time Superman was done any sort of justice on the big screen was in 1980.
And no, Man of Steel wasn't good. Being desaturated doesn't make something art. Superman, DC, and honestly just the entire superhero genre as a whole has been in a very steady decline in recent years. This movie was a breath of fresh air. For some reason, superhero movies have always been afraid to lean into their comic book heritage, like the X-Men and the Snyderverse. This movie fully embraces its source material, which is something I can't say much for other superhero movies. The only other superhero movie that I can say fully embraces the source material is The Batman. Correct me if I'm wrong. Embracing the source material doesn't necessarily make something a good film, but it did make it original, and it did make it very significant and put the movie towards a great start. The first actual point I want to discuss is the soundtrack. This movie included the John Williams soundtrack from the 1978 movie, which already gave me goosebumps, and it also incorporated some new notes and elements into the score which made it a little bit different. I thought that was a great decision. I think that's a much better choice than just reusing the same score from the original, and I say that as a massive fan of the original score. I think still using the original elements of the score is Gunn's way of telling the audience that they're staying true to the core roots of Superman, and I think the new elements of the score is Gunn's way of telling the audience that despite staying true to the roots and the character's history, we are going to take the character of Superman and do things with the character that we haven't done before, and that's honestly just a really good representation of the movie. The next point is the visual effects. I've seen the effects of the movie be criticized by some people, but honestly I think the CGI and the film's general aesthetics were really cool, and they seemed like they were ripped straight out of a comic book, and better yet, they were also just, again, really original. I have never seen a superhero movie with this sort of aesthetic before, and honestly it really worked on me. I thought it was really charming and visually pleasing. The next point I want to discuss is the character of Lex Luthor. Lex is just so fucking hateable in this movie, it's amazing. This guy pissed me off so much that I started laughing when he was getting mauled to death by a fucking dog. But being a hateable piece of shit is not the only aspect of Lex that makes him a great villain, it's his motivations. Lex in this movie is a character driven completely by his insecurities. Before Superman, Lex is implied to be one of the most powerful people on the planet. He has an entire company and enterprise, he's one of the wealthiest people on Earth, he has access to all sorts of great technology and even has the power to start wars just by snapping his grubby little fingers, which he does in the movie. On the inside though, Lex knows how weak he is. He puts on this disguise, he's trying to show the world how powerful and tough he is, but on the inside he knows he's not any of that. He's insecure about how weak he is, but he does his best to hide his insecurities from the real world and puts on his powerful exterior.
However, Superman comes along. This guy is essentially immortal unless you have this one specific material which chances are you'll never get your hands on. He has super strength, super speed, super agility. He basically can't die unless you get kryptonite.
And worst of all, every human pales in comparison to him. Lex was once one of the most powerful and intimidating people on the planet. But then this random guy shows up, and he has the nerve to be more powerful than him. In comparison to Superman, Lex is weak. This is clear as day to everybody. Now that Superman is around, everyone can clearly see just how weak Lex really is. His biggest insecurities have been put on full display for the entire world to see. Because of this, Lex hates Superman with a passion. Even in this infamous 1A scene, Lex is punching the air as if he's the one punching Superman. Also, I think 1A, the first number and the first letter, being just a simple cold punch in the face, is so fucking cool. And it really says a lot about Lex's hatred towards Superman. Lex wants to kill Superman so he'll go back to being the most powerful person on the planet, and all of his insecurities about how weak he is can be put to rest. I think the scene where Lex gets mauled by Crypto is actually a really good send-off. It wouldn't surprise me if some people tried to criticize the scene for being too campy or whatever, but in my opinion I think it said a lot about his character. Lex was so desperate to try and show everyone how powerful he was, and how he wasn't weak, but in the end, his weak persona was put on full display. He's so weak that he was thrown around, bit, mauled, and defeated by a puppy. Everyone saw how weak he was. He could no longer hide it. Despite the scene being comedic, it was a pretty well thought out comeuppance for Lex's character, in which his biggest insecurity was put on full display. The final positive I want to discuss is Superman's character arc and his overall characterization. The main plot of this movie stems from Superman stopping a war and him having to pay the consequences of his brash actions. I loved this. The scene where he and Lois have the incredibly passive-aggressive interview is by far my favourite scene in the movie. Basically, Superman made the incredibly brash decision to stop Boravia from invading Jarhamper. Superman did this because he knew that what Boravia was doing was morally wrong. He didn't care about the political issues that would follow. He didn't care about the backlash he would get. He didn't care about the legal issues he would get in. He saw a country doing bad things towards another country, and Superman stepped in to do the right thing. Superman committing such a naive action like this on the big screen just makes me so fucking happy. This is 100% something Superman would do. He's a fucking Boy Scout. He's incredibly naive, and that's definitely his biggest flaw. And he doesn't care about the cost that doing the right thing will have on him. The fact that essentially every single plotline in the movie unfolds as a result of Superman doing this is great. The characterization of Superman in this movie is just perfect, and his characterization is perfectly demonstrated through his actions in Boravia. Superman's character arc is also very nice. It's very simple, but despite that I think it's good. Superman starts the movie as completely motivated by the video his parents sent. He does all the good things that he does because his parents told him to do that. However, once the latter half of the video is shown to Superman and the world, where his bio parents essentially told Superman to shag every woman there and colonize the planet, Superman enters a moral crisis. The reason he does all of these good things is because of his parents' message. So if his parents' intentions were actually villainous, can Superman even call himself a hero anymore? However, Superman learns that it doesn't matter what his bio parents wanted him to be, or what the world expects him to be, or what Lex expects him to be. He learns that his motivations stem from wanting to do good, and that he's his own person, and ultimately continues to be Superman. Because his true intentions are wanting to be a hero and wanting to help people, so it doesn't matter what his bio parents' true intentions were. His motivations stem from a desire to do good, not from his parents' recording. Like I said, it's a very simple character arc. It's not a standout, incredibly developed and in-depth arc like Bruce's arc in The Batman, but I think it's an arc very fitting for this movie. This movie is starting a saga which could potentially last a decade or more. I think the first big step in Superman's character arc being that he understands his true motivations is very fitting. Him learning why he does the things he does is a great way to start his journey. However, the movie is not without faults. Most of the flaws aren't massive, but I think they're worth mentioning. The first thing I didn't like was Jimmy's character. Basically, Jimmy's informant has like this massive crush on him, but Jimmy clearly doesn't reciprocate those feelings, but in the end of the movie he just continues to lead her on. Like, it's not only implied, it's stated that he doesn't like her, but it's implied they get together at the end, even though, like I said, he doesn't like her. Like, wow, way to go, man. Great way to show some respect. Also, there's this gag in the movie of Jimmy being super attractive, and like, am I the only one who doesn't see it? Like, I get it's subjective, but I don't know, it's kind of good. Some of the dialogue is also not great. Like, James Gunn is one of my favorite directors of the 21st century. The Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is my favorite superhero trilogy, and the Suicide Squad is one of my favorite DCEU movies. However, I think in recent years some of his dialogue has become worse, specifically since the start of the decade. I think the first Guardians movie had great dialogue, and the second one had pretty good dialogue, I'd say. But in the third movie, the dialogue felt a lot less natural, and this trend has carried into this movie. I don't know if it's just me who thinks this, or if it's just my personal taste. But some of the lines in this movie were just kind of weird. Also, there were just a lot of basic screenwriting errors. I noticed a few as you know Bobs in this movie. For example, in the scene where Superman is saved by the robots in the opening scene, the robots have to explain to each other how the sun heals Superman, even though every robot here knows this, as it's literally their jobs. But they had to say it out loud so the audience knows that the sun can heal Superman.
The next thing is kind of weird. It was a complaint I used to have for the film, but after a few rewatches, I actually now view it as a strength.
Basically, when I first saw the film, I thought it would have been better if they devoted the first 15 or so minutes to watching Superman stop the war. I thought this because, well, this is literally the event that drives the plot of the movie, so I figured it was only logical to have it be the starting point. I was confused as to why we don't see the event that the movie revolves around as the opening scene, and the first scene we see is instead of Superman just in a fight. However, upon rewatch, there was something about this opening scene that I noticed, which made me actually really glad this was how the movie began. I believe the opening scene we get is... I believe it says a lot about Superman's character. The very first scene he's in, he's injured and needs help. This shows that he isn't some god. He is mortal, just like any person, which shows that Superman is just like any human who can get hurt. It links back to the film's theme of humanity, and how Superman is just as human as the next one. I think it's a great introduction to his character. I think having this be like the fifth scene of the movie, like I originally thought, would have butchered the flow a bit, because Superman being established as a very human character, despite not being a human biologically, in his very first scene is such a great start. It also immediately changes the audience expectations. For the past 15 years, audiences have been shown this version of Superman who is a borderline god who only gets hurt when kryptonite is involved. Right out of the gate, Superman is established as being very human as he loses a fight. Gunn immediately conveys that Superman is not a god. He doesn't win every fight, as at the core of his character, he is human. He screws up all the time, but that is being human, and that's his greatest strength. That's a speech at the end of the movie. Yeah, it's cool. The final thing I want to mention, which is actually, we're back to complaints, is that James Gunn doesn't really want to leave his comfort zone, it seems. Basically, James Gunn has always been more comfortable writing movies with teams, so that characters can bounce off each other. This is evident in Guardians of the Galaxy, The Suicide Squad, and even Peacemaker, a solo project. In this movie, it's no different. James Gunn incorporates an early version of the Justice League called the Justice Gang into the movie, so they can interact with Superman. He does this obviously to play to his strengths as a writer. Now, I'm not criticizing Gunn here for having strengths. Everyone has their strengths. However, if you refuse to leave your comfort zone and never try to branch out to do different things, that literally means you'll never be able to improve on the things you're less confident at. In this movie, I guess it's forgivable as Superman will one day join the Justice League, and this is already an established canon, but it does show Gunn not wanting to leave his comfort zone as a writer, and it does also suggest he'll continue doing this in other solo superhero movies he writes. So those are my overall thoughts on Superman. I'd probably give it an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. The flaws I listed were honestly nitpicks for the most part, so they don't ruin the movie for me. It was still one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had at a cinema, and I think that this movie is a movie that the genre, specifically DC, needed. I'm really looking forward to the sequel in 2027. Number 4. K-pop Demon Hunters. I have nowhere near as much to say about this one as I did Superman. Personally, I think I liked Superman more than this movie, but that movie has more flaws than this one, which makes K-pop Demon Hunters better overall. This is probably going to be the shortest segment in this video because it's the one I have the least to say about. However, I think it is great nonetheless. First of all, the animation is really cool. It has that Spider-Verse type of style to it, which isn't exactly unusual. Like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish had that, Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem had that, but those movies use the animation in unique ways. Into the Spider-Verse uses the animation to give off a comic book aesthetic, and Mutant Mayhem uses the animation to blend into the New York aesthetic by having it look like subway graffiti. This movie is pretty unique too, as the aesthetics are supposed to be reminiscent of anime. I'm not that big of a fan of anime, so I don't know if it did the art form justice, but I can say for sure that I definitely found it visually pleasing. I also like how the characters emoted, like animating emojis onto the characters' faces. Again, I don't know that much about anime, so it's not really up to me to judge if it fit the aesthetic, but I found it really unique and pretty cute, which balanced it out very nicely with the really complex, and I mean that in a good way, animation we see throughout the rest of the film. Also, the soundtrack is so fucking good. I'm definitely not the first person to say that, but the reason I'm not the first person to say that is because it's true. Golden is a really good song, and it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that it turned out to be the hit that it was. The lyrics are also really good at incorporating Rumi's conflict while still maintaining its position as a fun song that's really nice to listen to. Also, this movie is very creative. If you couldn't tell already, the movie is literally called K-pop Demon Hunters. Yeah, I doubt this thing was thought of in one night. But the movie is very creative with its world building, as all the world building fleshes out the story, not just the plot. The lore in this movie is basically there is this demon world. The demon world often infiltrates Earth to take human souls and feed them to their master. There is one way to stop this, however. Basically, each generation 3 women are chosen to save Earth from this demon world. These women have really good singing voices, and these singing voices help build this magical wall which seals off the demon world from the human world, ultimately getting rid of all demons on Earth. They also kick the shit out of demons on multiple occasions. Now, the main character, who is named Rumi, has a deep, dark secret. She is a demon. Her father was a demon, her mother was a demon, so she is a half demon. Basically, demons have these scars all over their body, which the movie refers to as patterns. Since Rumi is a half demon, she has these patterns too. Rumi is very eager to finish singing their song season, or whatever the fuck it was called, because once they finish that will ultimately build the magical wall which will separate the human world from the demon world. Now, these patterns are a metaphor. They are symbols for the character's deep shame and emotional scars. Rumi's deep shame is that she is a half demon. Her entire job description is killing demons, even though she herself is a demon. Wait a fucking minute, this is just Blade Runner. Anyway, she tries to hide her patterns throughout the movie, symbolizing how she is trying to hide her shame and scars. She does this by wearing long sleeve shirts which cover up the patterns. She wants to seal off the demon world so no one will ever learn of her scars. This, however, doesn't work. Eventually everyone learns that she has the patterns, everyone has learned the deep shame that she has and that she herself is a half demon. Rumi thought she could win the external plot by keeping her scars a secret and by just getting rid of them, but this didn't work, and the big demon guy actually just started eating more souls, including her best friends. So yeah, she really shat the bed on this one. However, in the climax, the way she defeats the big demon bad guy is by singing a song about her scars. This sounds stupid, but basically this causes the demon bad guy to accidentally uneat the souls of her friends. She and her friends then go on to fight the bad guy, and yeah. She thought that the only way to win was by keeping her shame hidden deep down and hiding it away, but really the way she won in the end was by embracing her scars, embracing her shame, embracing your true self. Hiding your scars isn't going to help you, but embracing them and sharing them with your close friends will, because we all have scars. You're not going to solve any problems by rejecting yourself, but rather by embracing yourself instead. Good moral for young, impressionable kids, and even teenagers like myself to learn. Now, if you couldn't tell, it's actually been a while since I've seen the movie. That was probably evident as I kept calling the bad guy the big demon bad guy. I am basing all of this on memory, and yeah, that's probably unprofessional, but big fucking deal. I'm not getting paid for this, so who actually cares? I have seen the other ones, though, on this list, so they'll be more in depth. Anyway, K-pop Demon Hunters is, in my opinion, the best animated movie of 2025. I didn't see Nizar 2. I think I pronounced that right. Zootropolis 2 was pretty good, but I had quite a few problems with that movie, and Elio was pretty standard. I hope it wins the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, but to be fair, there is not much competition. Since it's apparently immature for an animated movie to win Best Picture, I can't see it winning that award. The biggest reason as to why I can't see it winning Best Picture is because it wasn't nominated for it. Being nominated for Best Picture typically helps movies win Best Picture. As for Best Picture though, let's see my top 3 candidates. Number 3, A Real Pain. Now, you may be surprised that this movie is on the list, as you may think this movie came out in 2024. However, it came out in the UK in 2025, so technically I'm able to include this movie, which I'm really happy about because I thought this movie was fantastic. Something really great about this movie is that the message, character development, the symbolism is all up for interpretation. Now, this is technically true for any piece of art. It all depends on your perspective. However, you do have to admit, some movies aren't open to interpretation. The movies I listed in my top 5 favourite movies video aren't really movies that are open to interpretation. There are multiple ways that you can infer Benji's character arc and David's character arc. However, there aren't multiple ways that you can infer Caesar's character arc in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. His arc there is very objective. Honestly, I'd prefer a character arc which is a bit more objective, but once in a while it's nice to see a movie like A Real Pain where all the symbolism and themes rely on the viewer's perspective. I'll discuss my interpretation of the characters, but before I do I want to talk about the performances. Jesse Eisenberg is honestly a typecast actor, I think. He plays the socially awkward, genius and nerdy guy. I think he is great at playing that type of character. The Social Network is in my top 3 favourite movies. However, the entire point of acting is that you branch out of your comfort zone and act as someone who isn't yourself. If you're a good actor, you could play multiple different types of roles, whether that's a Navy SEAL or a socially awkward nerd, because you're supposed to be acting. If you're perfect at playing the insecure, awkward genius, and you don't do anything else, then you're a good, insecure, awkward genius. However, that doesn't mean you're a good actor, because at that point you're not actually acting, you're just playing the same archetype with different screenplays. I'm not trying to insult Eisenberg, he's incredibly talented at playing the characters he does play. But if you constantly play the same archetypes, then you're not a great actor. However, in this movie, he actually does something different. He is still fast talking, but he isn't that socially awkward. He is a bit awkward, but that comes more from shyness. He's able to pick up on social cues a lot more than his cousin Benji. He's a lot more socially available here, and he is actually a lot more emotionally available too. He has a loving family, and he's clearly an emotionally available father and husband. He actually plays something a bit different here, which made me respect him a bit more as an actor. Additionally, his performance bounces off Benji's character very well. Who knew that the bedwetter from Home Alone had this much charisma? The awkward and shy performance of Eisenberg bounces off perfectly with the charismatic yet hurt performance of Kieran Culkin. Culkin does a great job at playing Benji. He is able to perfectly deliver the charisma of Benji, and he's able to perfectly show that his charisma and humour is a mask for how emotionally hurt and damaged he is. Both actors do a great job in this movie. Now, like I said, I've seen multiple interpretations of Benji's character arc. Before I get into them and how interesting they are, I'll give my take. Benji at the start of the film is clearly damaged by the loss of their grandma. Despite never being stated, I thought it was heavily implied that his parents aren't really in the picture. The relationship between Benji and David is very estranged. Not only does this mean he has no connection with his cousin, but it also means he has no connection to his second cousin or his cousin-in-law. He has no connection to his mom, dad, cousin, cousin-in-law, or his second cousin, meaning the only connection he had was with his grandma. She was really the only family he had left, and from his perspective, was the only person who still loved him. However, now she's gone, meaning that from his perspective, there's no one left in this family who loves him. Benji feels David doesn't love him because he feels that David has abandoned him. He moved away, he never really visits. He used to be super emotional, but now he's a lot more stable. The version of David that grew up with Benji has seemingly vanished, figuratively and literally, and they are no longer close anymore. This is the main reason why Benji feels abandoned by David. Benji tells David this story about how their grandma slapped Benji in a restaurant in his early 20s. At this point in his life, Benji was very lost. He needed direction, he needed some kind of path in life. And while writing this, I'm thinking that Benji being late to this dinner just shows how disorganized he was. Because of how late he was, their grandma slapped him. Their grandma was surrounded by people she knew who were very important in her social circle. She was in a very fancy environment, which was a very fancy restaurant. She was also stated to be dressed up. Her slapping her grandson in an environment like this obviously will mean some judgment will be passed on to her, and it could potentially damage her image. However, she didn't care. Benji needed direction. Her slapping him would give him that direction, as ridiculous as that sounds. She cared more about Benji than she did her public image and that judgment being passed on to her. This story perfectly shows Grandma's love for Benji. Then, near the end, once the trip is finished and they're back in New York, David slaps Benji right in the face. David is an awkward person. Throughout the movie, it's shown that David gets embarrassed easily when Benji messes up in social situations. Like when Benji had the rant on the train or how he was acting at the dinner table. However, here, David slaps Benji right in the face at the airport. There are dozens of people who probably saw this. David clearly doesn't like being at the center of attention, but he became the center of attention anyway by slapping Benji in a public space. This is obviously a reflection of the dinner story. Both characters who slapped Benji had a lot to risk. The grandma had a lot to risk as her public image was at stake. David has a lot to risk as he was becoming the center of attention. However, both characters slapped Benji because at both points in his life, he needed direction. David prioritized Benji's well-being over his own comfort. The grandma slapping Benji showed Benji that she cared for him and that she loved him. David slapping Benji showed Benji that despite grandma being gone, there are still people out there who care for him and love him. Benji's character arc is about learning that he isn't alone and that there are still people who care about him and love him. Then, in the ending scene, Benji is still waiting in the airport. An airport is a place where you can go to any place you want. It takes you to different places. This symbolizes how Benji can take any direction in life and how he has no clear path. I've seen this scene be interpreted very differently, but I thought this scene meant that Benji was slightly more motivated. Earlier on, Benji was completely ready to give up. He had a suicide attempt, he clearly had no more motivation to keep living. However, here, he's still sitting at the airport, which symbolizes how he's now examining the different directions he can take his life. This new wave of motivation comes from him learning that people still love him. In the beginning, he was willing to die because he thought there was no one left who loved him. However, in the end, he's now willing to continue living, despite not knowing in which direction, because he knows that there are people who love him, like David. Now, that's how I interpreted the movie. I admit it's a very optimistic interpretation. I've read a lot more pessimistic interpretations though. That's not me trying to discredit the theories by any means. They have just as much credit as mine because this movie is clearly a subjective movie which is up to interpretation. I always took Benji to be the main character as I thought he was the one with the big character arc. However, I've read some interpretations which place David as the main character, and Benji being a symbol of his trauma, which David has moved on from in the sense that he's moved away, but he can ultimately return to visit his trauma to open up and be upfront with. He then leaves and goes home, leaving his trauma in the exact same place where he found it, the airport. David's trauma is waiting for David for whenever he needs him again. I think that's a very interesting theory. It doesn't really incorporate the slap into the story, but it does incorporate the airport in a different way that I inferred. There are also theories about neither David or Benji having character arcs, at all, which I do disagree with. I know this movie is very subjective, but the characters do clearly have arcs. It just depends on how you view it, but the arcs are present nonetheless. So, those are my thoughts on A Real Pain. I think Eisenberg has definitely proved himself as a director and a screenwriter right out of the gate, and I can't wait to see what he has in store next.
Number 2. One battle after another. I think the thing that impressed me most about the movie is that I genuinely didn't think I was going to like it, let alone watch it at all. The main reason why is just that the trailers did not sell me, at all. I specifically remember I was seeing Fantastic Four back in July with my friends, and the trailer came on for one battle, and I leaned over to my friend and whispered, "Yeah, that looks like shit." I didn't know much of the plot, so from the trailers I just inferred that this movie was going to be about an overprotective dad learning to let his daughter leave the nest, now that she was grown up, like the fucking Croods or some shit. Also, I just didn't think the trailers were that funny, so that didn't help either. The only reason I ended up seeing it was that it received critical acclaim, and Spielberg said that he thought it was really good, so I decided to watch it, and yeah, I loved it. The first thing I want to discuss is the cinematography. During the third act of the film, the climax involves Bob chasing Willa and her kidnapper over a few hills. And the shots of the cars going up and over the hills were just so fucking mesmerizing. I was literally on the edge of my seat while watching that sequence. I'm not even exaggerating. My ass was literally hanging over the seat. From what I remember, my hand was also covering my mouth too. My investment in the sequence is also even more impressive when you take into account that this scene is literally just 3 cars going up and down a hill. And the director was so talented that he was able to make one of the most intense sequences I've seen all year. My engagement with the movie was just something I would not have been able to achieve if I had just watched it on my TV or if I pirated it. This was made for cinemas. And this movie is just another reason why cinemas are so important for movies. There are a lot of cool other action sequences in this movie, but I think this one was the one that was first of all the most impressive and represents the great cinematography and direction in the movie as a whole. It's been over 2 months since I've seen the movie at the time of writing this, so it's generally impressive on Anderson's part that I remember the sequence as vividly as I do. The next thing I want to discuss is my praise for Lockjaw as an antagonist. His motivations are really interesting. Essentially, Willa is a result of her mother's adultery, and is revealed to be Lockjaw's daughter, not Bob's. This wouldn't seem like such a big deal that he'd have to kill her, but Lockjaw is a member, a core member of this white supremacy group, and considering Willa's mother is black, Lockjaw, a white supremacist, shagging a black woman, would get him in serious trouble. He can't exactly shove the secret under the rug, as Willa is the daughter of both of them, so Willa is living proof of Lockjaw's affair with a black woman. If his KKK-like group finds out about this scandal, Lockjaw knows that they will probably kill him for it, so he has to kill Willa before his cult can find out about her. I really like antagonists like Lockjaw, characters who in reality have more to lose than our protagonists. He reminds me a bit of Le Chief from Casino Royale. Both antagonists put on a cold and stone face, but on the inside are actually scared shitless because their backs are against the wall because of their mistakes. And their cold masks begin to slip, and eventually you see how scared they are because their asses are on the line.
Antagonists who have more to lose than our protagonists are really interesting in my opinion, and Lockjaw is no exception. There is one slight problem with Lockjaw though. It's not a big deal, really, and it's not so much to do with his character, but rather his fate. I want to structure this segment as my positives first, and later negatives, so I'll continue my lists of positives and then I'll mention my complaint at the end of this section. Now, Bob's character arc is probably the best part of the film. In the prologue, Bob is a revolutionary. He's motivated because he wants to change the world. And his want for change is what gives him purpose and passion in life. His sense of purpose comes from his desire to change the world. However, once his career as a revolutionary was forced into a reluctant end, that meant he could no longer fight for change. Because that was his cause and passion, he no longer has either of those things, making him feel lost and incomplete in life. He continues to make his way through life being completely unmotivated and burned the fuck out. However, as the plot begins to unfold, he regains his motivation. Willow is kidnapped, and Bob originally acts as a passive character. Because of his lack of motivation, he lets the plot happen to him instead of actually impacting the plot himself. However, he becomes a much more active character as the movie continues, actually impacting the plot and story instead of just letting the events happen to him, and this emphasizes his gain of motivation. He finds motivation in becoming an actual parent to Willow rather than just her washed-up roommate. His cause in the prologue was wanting to change the world, and he found a new cause later on in the movie, which was becoming a better father to Willow. He also has another arc, which is about adapting to the modern world. Bob fears his past life as a revolutionary catching up to him. Because of this, he's lived his entire life in paranoia and isolation, hiding himself away from the outside world. He also isolates Willow, not really allowing her to be the free spirit she is because he fears that his life as a revolutionary will catch up to the both of them. He believes living in isolation will protect them both. However, despite them both living in isolation, Bob's past catches up with them anyway, as Lockjaw kidnaps Willow. Bob originally thought that living in isolation would protect them, but in the end, his past caught up to them anyway, like it would have anyway if Bob hadn't been living in isolation for his entire life. This teaches a really good moral in my opinion, that you can live in paranoia and isolation all you want, but that won't save you in the end. Bob's growth past his isolation and paranoia can be perfectly symbolized through Bob now using a phone. A phone is a symbol of the modern world. In the beginning of the film, Bob originally is very hesitant towards using a phone, symbolizing how he doesn't want to adapt to the modern world and wants to keep living in isolation. However, in the end of the movie, he is trying to use a phone. He's struggling to figure out how it works, symbolizing how he is definitely struggling to adapt to the modern world and to move past his isolation, but he is definitely putting in the best effort to do so and is definitely trying his best. And he has learned that isolating himself and Willow isn't benefiting them in the slightest. Also, Willow has a nice arc too. It's not as massive as Bob's, but it's definitely present. She starts the film as a rather innocent child. She starts the plot at a school dance. Childish may be a strong word, but it's not exactly a grown-up thing to do. And she ends the movie in the complete opposite state. She's now an activist, it seems, by the end, and has clearly found cause within her life. She started as a child and ended up as a much more mature person fighting the good fight. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there is one complaint I had with the movie, which was Lockjaw's original defeat. Basically, in the beginning of the climax, this guy shoots Lockjaw in the face. He has a fucking bullet wound in the face. This then causes his truck to flip and do a crash like the king in the climax of Cars. Now, you'd assume he was dead, but no. After the climax, he just stands up and fucking walks home. Like, that defeat was so fucking crazy. If that were to happen to a Fast and Furious character, they would groan slightly. I get why they didn't want him dead, and I do think his actual defeat in the new office is one of my favourite scenes in the movie. The direction and suspense in that scene is just so fucking good. And it also shows how little loyalty the cult has towards even their own members. But I'm just so confused. Why have the crash be that graphic and insane at all if you don't want him to die there, and if you want his death to be done in a completely different way? Like, I can usually excuse unrealism in movies, but this one confused me and pissed me off because of how they went to kill him in the next scene anyway. Why even include this dramatic of a death? Only for it to essentially mean nothing as he just walks it off. It's not a big deal really, but it did have me thinking, what the fuck, when I saw it in cinemas. So those are my thoughts on one battle after another. I wasn't really surprised when it won Best Film for the National Board of Review, because they usually prefer films with practical effects rather than CGI. However, I still would prefer for my number one pick to win Best Film. Before I list my number one, I would like to list some honourable mentions. Like last time, I'm not going to go into detail as to why I love these for time constraints. I'm just going to list the titles. How to Train Your Dragon Remake, Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, Predator, Killer of Killers, Dogman, F1, The Fantastic Four First Steps, We Live in Time, released in 2024 in the US while it was released in 2025 in the UK, so it counts. Frankenstein, Thunderbolts, Wicked for Good, and Weapons. It should now be pretty obvious what my number one pick is. Number one, Sinners. Yeah, this isn't really a hot take. Out of every single movie that came out this year, this is probably the one that's received the most acclaim. And I cannot deny that this movie completely deserves every single positive review it's gotten. This isn't even just a very good movie. I believe Sinners is a perfect 10 out of 10 movie. And if I had seen it while I was writing my top 5 all-time favourites video, it definitely would have received an honourable mention. It might have even made the cut. There are a few little things I want to discuss first of all, and then I'll move on to talking about the bigger aspects of the film. The first thing I want to bring up is the cinematography. Holy shit, this movie is gorgeous. The lighting was so mesmerizing, and I can't even think of a better word to describe it. The movie takes advantage of how beautiful movies can look. The movie is so beautiful to look at that I'll be kicking myself forever for not seeing it at the cinema. Another thing is the performances. Everyone does a great job in this movie. Considering this is Miles Keaton's first role, I think he deserves a lot of credit. But I also think Michael B. Jordan deserves a lot of credit too. He's able to perfectly play two different twins who both have charisma in very different ways. Stack is the more playful and fun twin, while Smoke is much more serious and stern. Both characters required a lot of effort from Jordan in opposite ways, and he was able to play them both without breaking a sweat. I honestly forgot he was just one person because he was doing such a great job in both roles. I had always considered Michael B. Jordan to be a good actor, but I think it was Sinners which has now convinced me that he is a great actor. The final little thing, I love how this movie uses its genre to tell its story. I'm not much of a horror fan. I have not seen that many horror movies, and I think the reason that this movie is one of my favourites of all time is because of how it handles its use of vampires. I think the key to making a good genre-heavy movie is by having the genre be important and somewhat a metaphor to the plot. Take Back to the Future. This trilogy uses time travel as a metaphor to convey the moral that your future isn't set in stone, and it's never too late to change your life for the better. Take Shaun of the Dead. This movie has to use zombies. It can't use vampires or any other kind of creature, because zombies reflect the character of Shaun. Shaun is mindlessly wasting his life away. He's walking around brainlessly, showing how uninspired he is to do anything in life. The zombies mirror this as, like Shaun, zombies mindlessly walk around as well. They too walk around brainlessly. This movie requires zombies because it reflects the story that's being told. That's the same with this movie. This movie has to use vampires because of the film's main theme of the importance of inner peace as well as identity and culture. I'll elaborate on this, but I want to save this for the bigger section in the video. It doesn't just use vampires for the scares, it uses vampires because it reflects the story being told and the main message the movie conveys. My first big point, Remick is a brilliant antagonist. Remick's backstory is that he grew up in Ireland. However, his land was soon taken by colonists and he was forced to adapt to new things. Like he was forced to adapt to their religion. Remek's original culture was erased by the colonists, and the colonists enforced their own culture, their religion, onto Remek. Remek's culture was erased. He had always resented the people who took his land because of how they took away his culture, which was a big part of his identity. Remek also has a separate problem. He's a vampire. That is something that I would classify as a pretty big problem. This means that he is cursed with immortality, which is bad because all of his loved ones from his human life were mortals, as they weren't vampires, meaning they passed on and died while Remek was cursed with staying alive. It's not entirely confirmed how Remek has been alive for, but I have read theories that it's been over a millennium. Remek has spent over 1,000 years being alone, watching his loved ones die, while he has no choice but to continue living. Now, in this movie, there is a way for him to see his dead loved ones. Apparently, if someone is really good at playing music, the music is able to connect the past, present, and future. This means that the music is able to connect the afterlife with the living. This means that if Remek can find someone who can play music really fucking well, he can see his mortal loved ones who have died centuries before, meaning he doesn't have to be alone anymore. That is, if he can find someone who can play music really well. And lo and behold, Remek does. Remek is drawn to Sammy's musical talents. Sammy can play music really well, which means he's able to connect the afterlife with the living. This makes Sammy Remek's main target, as Sammy's gift can end Remek's loneliness that comes with his immortality. Now, this next part is the reason why Remek is such a good antagonist. There is this scene where Smoke and Sammy drop a seemingly bitten body outside. It's really important that Sammy is the one watching this scene unfold, and I'll explain why when I discuss him. Basically, Remek has bitten like 20 people, all of whom are black, except for Bo. Remek, being the leader of the vampires, forces everyone to dance to an Irish folk song. Now, throughout the movie, it's made clear that the culture and identities of the African American people in this movie lie deeply in their love of traditional African American music, like the blues. The blues symbolizes their African culture, and it is very important to their identities. However, the music that Remek is forcing them to dance to is Irish folk music, obviously symbolizing Remek's culture and identity. Remek is enforcing his own culture, his own identity, onto these black people. These African Americans singing Irish folk music instead of traditional blues music symbolizes how Remek is erasing their identities by enforcing his own culture onto them. Remek enforcing his own culture erases the black people's culture and their own identities. This perfectly mirrors Remek's origin story. The colonists enforced their own culture and their own identities onto Remek, therefore erasing his own culture and his own identity. Remek is doing the exact same thing with the African American characters in this scene, as he's enforcing his own culture and his own identity onto these people, therefore erasing their own cultures and their own identities. Remek has spent his entire life, both his human years and his vampire years, hating and resenting the colonists who stole his land and his sense of identity, only to end up repeating the exact same sins and ends up becoming just as bad as they were. This makes Remek a very tragic character. Remek also fits into Sammy's arc very well, I think, but I'll get to that in a bit. Now onto the two biggest characters, the Smokestack twins. These two are brothers who have been together for their entire lives. They grew up together in the same town with the same abusive father, they fought in World War I together, they worked for Capone in Chicago together, and finally, they returned to Mississippi to start a new life together. They do not know how to live life apart. They have both lived the exact same lives, but end up suffering the complete opposite fates. The motivations of the twins are very simple. Smoke and Stack have been living crime-filled lives for 7 years in Chicago. They've lived their lives committing sins. They kill people by shooting them, they steal from people. Because of the violent, dishonest and sinful lives both the twins live, they obviously don't live peaceful lives, meaning they can't experience inner peace and satisfaction within their lives. The twins don't want this though. They want to live peaceful lives, and they want to have satisfaction within their lives. They believe the solution to their want for inner peace is by moving back to Mississippi and starting a new life back there. They believe inner peace will come naturally to them because they are starting over in a new place. However, neither of the twins change in the slightest. In Chicago, they kill people by shooting them, and they constantly steal and rip people off. In Mississippi, they do the exact same thing. They kill a snake, Smoke shoots two random guys after they go near his truck. Both the twins rip off and steal money from the Chicago and Irish mafias to open the juke joint back home. They intend on living peaceful lives in Mississippi, but they plan on doing this by committing the exact same sins that they committed in Chicago. Because they continue to commit evil deeds, the evil continues to follow them back home to Mississippi in the form of the vampires. This is where my favourite line in the movie comes in, which summarises the moral being presented. The line is said by Sammy's father, which is, "You keep dancing with the devil, one day he's gonna follow you home." The dances with the devil that the twins commit are the sins that they commit, being murders, shooting, theft, and scamming. The devil following you home means the evil catching up to the twins and them facing the consequences of their sinning ways. And the one day symbolises the inevitability of the twins facing the consequences of their sins. Stack is bitten first and turns into a vampire. Like I said earlier, this causes Remick to extract his identity and culture. I'll explain why I think this later, but this prevents Stack from ever experiencing the inner peace he was previously chasing because he no longer has his own identity as it was taken from Remick. Remick is a force of evil, the evil that continued to follow Smoke and Stack because of how they did evil things. This means that Stack has been cursed with never being able to experience inner peace because of how throughout his entire life he was constantly committing sins and never changed his way of living. Smoke, on the other hand, is never bitten. He dies in the end when he's killed in the shootout with the KKK. Smoke is reunited with Annie and their dead daughter in the afterlife. This is Smoke finally experiencing inner peace, because he's finally able to live the peaceful life he's always wanted as a husband and as a father. Now, Smoke being able to experience this inner peace isn't just luck on his part. Smoke experienced inner peace because he was able to change his ways and stop committing sins before it was too late. In the scene where he enters the afterlife, he pulls out a cigarette. Annie makes him put out the cigarette before holding their daughter. Annie says, "Put that out, I don't want that smoke getting near my baby." She is obviously not talking about the cigarette smoke. The baby is already dead, it's not like she's going to contract lung cancer and die twice. The smoke that Annie is referring to is Smoke himself. She doesn't want that smoke near her baby. She wants Smoke himself to be near her baby, but not this version of Smoke. Not the sinner. Not the one who finds no problem in killing. Not the one who finds no problem in stealing. Not the one who prioritizes money over human connection. She wants the real Smoke, who's a loving husband and father. Smoke gives up his two sinning ways, his killing and his desire for money. Smoke gives up his killing ways by putting down the gun in the ending scene, symbolizing how he's given up killing. Smoke gives up his want for money by rejecting the clan leader's offer for money in exchange for his survival, symbolizing how money is no longer his driving motivation. Because Smoke has given up on his sinning ways, he is now finally able to experience the inner peace he has always wanted, by being a father and a husband. Stack, however, never did this, and now is cursed with immortality just like Remick was. He can never experience inner peace because he's trapped as a vampire, while Smoke can experience inner peace because he's living in the afterlife with Annie and his daughter. Also, I think Smoke giving up on his sinning ways is captured perfectly by Annie calling him by his real name, Elijah. Smoke was the alias that he gave himself as he started to spend his entire life sinning, and he finally started being called Elijah after he gave up his sinning ways and had gained inner peace. Stack, however, never went back to calling himself by his real name, which was Elias, as in the final scene in the movie set in 1992, he wore the bracelet that says Stack. Stack was the alias that he gave himself as he started to live his life sinning, and he was never able to go back to being Elias because he didn't give his sinning ways up in time and became a vampire, and was cursed with never being able to experience inner peace again. Now, on to Sammy. Sammy's character arc links to Remick, Smoke, and Stack by incorporating themes of identity and inner peace. Sammy starts the movie by experiencing an internal conflict of his own identity. Sammy personally wants to live his life playing the blues and playing music. However, Sammy's father, the pastor, disapproves of this. He wants Sammy to spend his life working for the church and spreading the word of God. Sammy doesn't know what to do. His entire identity revolves around blues and music. It's really the only thing he wants to do in his life. However, Sammy's father wants Sammy to work at the church. Sammy has this internal conflict about his identity for the first half of the movie. Now, this links to the scene I mentioned earlier. Smoke and Sammy carry the seemingly bitten man outside where they find Remick dancing with the other vampires. It is very important to Sammy's character arc that he sees this scene unfold. Remick has extracted the other vampires' identity, that part of their identity being their love for the blues. Remick has replaced the other vampires' identity with his own culture, that part of Remick's identity being Remick's love for Irish music. Sammy here sees the consequences of having your identity be extracted away from you. It means you no longer have the opportunity to experience inner peace. You have to live a meaningless existence without being able to experience inner peace because you no longer have your identity. In the end of the movie, after the night with the vampires, Sammy makes his decision. Sammy can either spend his life embracing his own identity, playing the blues, or Sammy can spend his life surrendering his identity by working at the church for his father. Sammy picks the first option by running away to Chicago and spending the rest of his life playing the blues and becoming a very successful musician. Sammy's decision doesn't just come out of nowhere. This is because Sammy's internal conflict is a reflection of the film's external conflict, the vampire plot. Sammy's father is a reflection of Remick. Both of these characters' main goals are to extract their victims' identities and have the victims live their lives under their control. The victims for Remick are the turned vampires. The victims for Sammy's father is Sammy. The control that the vampires are said to live under is being destined to live under Remick's mind control and being forced to live under his spell by being one of his vampires with no free will or inner peace. The control that Sammy is set to live under is being destined to live under Sammy's father's control and being forced to live his life by working at the church with no free will or inner peace. Sammy does not want to end up having the same fate as the vampires, so he decides to embrace his identity by playing the blues for the rest of his life so he can achieve inner peace. This is the reason why vampires are so important to this movie. Like Shaun of the Dead and how zombies are crucial to that movie, vampires are crucial to sinners. The vampire external conflict reflects Sammy's internal conflict. Additionally, becoming a vampire is the tragic end to Stack's character as he wasn't able to achieve inner peace like he always wanted. Finally, dying a human and arriving in the afterlife is the satisfying end to Smoke's character arc, as he was finally able to achieve inner peace. Sammy's character arc is concluded perfectly in the ending scene. This scene is set in 1992, 60 years after the events of the movie. In this scene, Sammy is incredibly old and performing at his club by playing the blues. This shows how he has spent his entire life embracing his identity. Stack and Mary then enter the building, meeting Sammy for the first time since the main events of the film. Stack offers Sammy the option of immortality, but Sammy declines. Sammy declining this offer symbolizes how he has finally achieved inner peace. Now, throughout the movie, all the characters try to avoid being turned into vampires. However, there is clearly some success in Remick tempting the characters. Remick tempts Sammy into becoming a vampire by asking him to join him with his ancestors through playing music. Remick tempts Mary into becoming a vampire by offering her fellowship and community. Stack tempts Smoke into becoming a vampire by offering the freedom and inner peace that he knows they will never be able to achieve in life. All of these characters are tempted because they lack inner peace. Sammy is tempted because Remick is allowing him to spend his immortality by playing music, which is what he wants. Sammy didn't have this yet in life because he wasn't willing to fully embrace his identity, loving the blues, due to the pressure he was experiencing from his father. Mary is tempted because Remick is offering her a community that she never received during life. Mary doesn't have community or fellowship because she's mixed race. At the time that this movie is set, this doesn't allow her to fully embrace her identity as a white person or as a black person due to the societal norms in the time period. Mary was tempted because she was conflicted about her identity, which is why she wasn't experiencing inner peace. Smoke is tempted because Stack is offering him the freedom and peace that their life wasn't ever going to provide for them. Smoke doesn't have the freedom or inner peace because he continues to commit sins and commit evil actions, which prevents him from living a peaceful life and therefore preventing him from experiencing inner peace. All of these characters are tempted because they lack inner peace. However, in the ending scene, when Stack offers Sammy immortality by becoming a vampire, Sammy quickly and surely makes sure to reject the offer. There was no internal debate. There was no need for Sammy to consider the option as Sammy had internal inner peace, as he spent his entire life embracing his identity. Sammy is fully okay with dying soon as he is satisfied with the life he has lived as he has embraced his identity. There's a few other things I want to point out. There are characters who the twins hire to work at the joint. These characters, unlike the twins, have mostly lived lives without constantly committing sins. Like Annie is definitely a good person who looks after her community. Cornbread is a family man who even has a child on the way and has a loving wife. Burr and Grace are also a loving couple who love their daughter and are doing their best to provide for their family with a good life. Every single person who I've just listed gets killed in the movie. Now, as the vampires are obviously a symbol for the evil that continues to follow the twins around as they continue to commit evil acts, this shows that the consequences of your immoral actions can impact everyone around you even though they don't deserve it. That's a really important message, despite it not being the most prominent one that the movie presents. Also, I really like the parallels in the method of recruitment between the way Smoke and Stack recruit people to work at the joint as to how Remick recruits people to be vampires. Smoke and Stack recruit people by promising them money. Well, technically they offer Slim a beer, but I feel like that still falls into the same category. However, after the night begins and the joint opens, and before the vampires visit, they ultimately spend the night together and as a community. They were promised money, but were ultimately given fellowship and community. Remick recruits people by promising them fellowship and community, the complete opposite tactic that the twins used. He promises them family and inner peace, but as the night goes on, and as we see in the 60-year flash forward, they lost their identities and never got the family they were promised as Remick was just using them. The twins promised money, but they were ultimately given a sense of family and community, while Remick promised that sense of family and community, but they were ultimately given a sentence to an unfulfilled and destineless existence of loneliness, just like Remick. I don't want to sound 70 or anything, but they just don't make them like this anymore. This movie is just a perfect historical movie, a perfect horror movie, a perfect character study, and overall just a perfect movie in my opinion. This movie came out about 9 months ago at the time of writing this script, so it might be a little premature, but I think it's safe to say that this movie won't be forgotten about for a long time, which is quite unusual for originals. If this movie doesn't win Best Picture at the Oscars, I'm taking to the fucking streets. No movie deserves the honor of Best Picture more than this cinematic masterpiece. If you haven't watched this movie yet, I highly recommend it, more than anything else that has been released this decade. Now, there are my top 5 favourite movies of 2025. Just a few extra details which aren't related to the list. My least favourite movie from this year was a Minecraft movie. It was horrible on quite literally every single level. The experience of watching it in a packed cinema was amazing. It made for a really fun time. But my god, it is quite literally one of the worst movies I've ever seen. War of the Worlds and Five Nights at Freddy's 2 were also terrible. I hated them as well. But that doesn't matter, because now that 2025 is over, it's time for me to turn my focus to 2026 movies. I think my most anticipated movies for this year are The Odyssey, Spider-Man Brand New Day, and the one I'm looking forward to the most, Project Hail Mary. I'd say Avengers Doomsday as well. I really, really want this movie to be good, but it just has so much working against it that I think the chances of it being up to the standards that the past Avengers movies have set is pretty slim. Also, I want Toy Story 5 to be good, but I just don't see how they can pull this movie off without it being completely shit. Hopefully my predictions for the last two will be proven wrong, but I guess we have to wait and see. In 1 year's time, hopefully I'll do the same type of video again, and I hope you tune in for when that video comes out. Thanks for watching and have a great day.